Hi there, history fans. So today I chose another topic on my own, or another video from a really cool channel called The Cold War, and the topic is how the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia became enemies. As most of you know, I'm Croatian, so in Croatia was a part of Yugoslavia after the Second World War, also known as the Second Yugoslavia, the Communist Yugoslavia, Tito's Yugoslavia, whatever you want to call it. And during my studies, I basically focused on Yugoslav history, so I think that I'm going to have some input to this topic. I didn't watch this video, but as I'm subscribed to their channel, I got a notification with that title, and I wanted to watch it with you guys first. So yeah, let's just jump into the video. As always, the link to the original video is in the description below. Check their channel out. I think the way that they present topics is really unique and very good. It kind of resembles Indy Nidell style, and I really highly recommend their channel. So let's just jump into the video. Bam.
The Cold War is often portrayed as a battle of East versus West, of the United States versus the Soviet Union, and the rest of the world choosing a side to support, or having that side chosen for them. But this narrative line ignores the reality that there were
I like the background
through the Cold
of
War
the office
that decided not to choose sides and remain in the middle. One of the most notable of these was a country we have talked about a bit up to this point, but certainly one deserving of more attention. I am of course referring to the land of the Southern Slavs, Yugoslavia, led by the charismatic strongman leader Josip Broz Tito. I'm your host David, and today we are going to take a closer look at Yugoslavia in the early Cold War period, a country that went from being a close ally of the Soviet Union to forging its own third way. This is the Cold War.
Just a quick stop. For those who are not Slavs, Yugo means actually, I don't know if it's in all Slavic languages, but in the South Slavic languages, Yugo just means south. So, South Slavia. Yeah.
The sponsor of today's video, Mova Globes, offers a truly unique product that would be a great Christmas gift, whether you're getting one for yourself or for your friends or family, fans of history or not. These globes, created by Mova Globes, rotate on their own. All they need is any interior light source,
nice,
but no cords or batteries are required. It almost sounds too good
I could
to be
order
true,
some of
but
them.
Mova Globes uses first-of-its-kind technology. The globe's rotation is powered by light and the Earth's magnetic field, requiring no cords or batteries. Hidden magnets provide movement when the globe is exposed to ambient lighting, and the fact that there is no cord is a great conversation starter. It's a great gift for someone who has everything or is difficult to find a present for, as globes are available in 40 designs, including world maps.
Or not, what? 160. Or not. Or not, I'm not gonna...
Artwork. This includes
I'm not gonna order them, they're too expensive. But they look pretty amazing, pretty cool.
Fan will find irresistible. The antique terrestrial globe with a vintage map from 1790 created by Giovanni Maria Cassini. Support our channel and get the gift of rotating globes by clicking our unique link in the description. And as a special offer for our viewers, use the code THECOLDWAR and get 10%
pretty
off.
Pretty cool.
The wartime devastation experienced by Yugoslavia was among the most severe in Europe. The country had been occupied by the Germans, but remained a battleground throughout the war years, and then even beyond as internecine fighting raged. While communist partisans fought the Germans.
Yeah, so the statistics that I saw, if I recollect correctly, was that approximately 40% of the livestock was just gone, so food. Approximately 60% of the industry, which was mostly stationed either in Slovenia or the Croatian parts of then Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and then later on the territory of Communist Yugoslavia. And other things like, I don't know how, I forgot the percentage-wise, how much people they lost, which is also an economic loss. But yeah, the war was devastating not only because it was an home army kind of defending, kind of defending against an invading army, but it was also a pretty devastating war because it kind of resembled also a civil war where different fractions inside of the territory of the former Kingdom of Yugoslavia, which was prior to the occupation of Yugoslavia by the Germans and Italians and the Axis powers, like you had the Croatian Ustasha, the Slovenian Home Guard, I think it's the English term. Then you had Nedic Serbia, which was also kind of allied to the Axis, and then they were, like ethnically Croats, ethnically Serbs, ethnically Slovenians, and then you had the Yugoslav partisans who were also ethnically Serbs, ethnically Bosniaks, ethnically Croats, and then you had also the Chetniks who were ethnically Serb, and all of them were fighting each other. And you could also see the devastation because if you enter like one village could support the Chetniks, the second village neighboring could support the partisans, and the third village would support the regime. So it was also not only fighting against the Germans or the Italians, so an outside power, but a lot of the devastation came from that, like neighbors fighting neighbors.
There was also the Serbian-dominated royalist forces, the Chetniks, who fought against the communists.
Mostly Serb.
Chetniks also, however, alternated between fighting against and collaborating with the German occupiers, depending on the situation at hand. Additionally, there was also the Slovenian Home Guard and the Croatian-dominated Ustasi, who both collaborated with the Nazi occupiers, primarily to further their anti-Serbian agendas.
First, the Chetniks were recognized as the allies of the allies, so of the anti-Axis powers. But later on, as he mentioned, the Chetniks moved more into collaboration with the Axis powers to fight against the Communist Party, which led eventually, especially Great Britain, to push, and of course the Soviet Union, because they were also communist allies, ideological allies, but they pushed, especially Great Britain, to officially recognize the Yugoslav Communist Party and Tito and the partisans as the official allies of the West against the Axis. So, yeah.
Now, the communists, under the leadership of Tito, were highly successful, and by 1944, German forces had been expelled from Serbia and by April 1945 from all Yugoslav territory. Most notably in this was that it was done without any significant outside help, especially from the Red Army. This allowed Yugoslavia and Tito to shape their own post-war path without imposition from outside influences. Tito chose to openly side with the socialist bloc in the immediate post-war period, a period which included a number of confrontations with the Western coalition. These run-ins happened in two main areas. The first one of these was Yugoslav support for the Greek communists in their civil war, where Tito was openly supplying them with military aid, safe havens, training, and logistical support. While Stalin had agreed with the British and Americans in the so-called percentages agreement that Greece would not fall into the Soviet sphere of influence, Tito was never a part of the agreement. It took direct pressure from the Soviet Union on the Greek communists to break off cooperation between Greece and Yugoslavia, but not before setting Tito and the Moscow mustache on a collision course. Now, the other area where
So the Greek Civil War, Yugoslavia did make significant contributions to the communist and other, let's call them lefty groups inside of Greece, and most notably is establishing supply bases and also military training bases and also medical bases inside of today's country of Northern Macedonia, which borders to Greece. The thing was, the Greek communists would fight against the opposition, and then if they had wounded or needed to resupply, they would just jump over the border to Yugoslavian territory into today's Northern Macedonia, regroup and whatever, and then jump in back to Greece. And Greece was officially recognized to fell under the Western powers. They pushed a lot of that, a lot of it, because they felt cultural ties with Greece because Greece was the home of democracy. That's where democracy was first invented, and blah 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 blah. So yeah.
Yugoslavia ran into confrontations with the West was over Istria.
Although
Istria. Istria had been an Italian possession in the years before the Second World War, it was Yugoslavian troops that pushed the German occupiers out of the region, and they felt that Istria should be part of Yugoslavia as a result. The struggle over the city of Trieste resulted in several aircraft shootdowns and condemnations by both the West and from Stalin.
Yeah,
the status of
that's
Trieste
true.
and Istria wasn't fully resolved until the 1975 Treaty of Osimo, but we should probably cover all of that in a dedicated episode. Let us know in the comments if you're interested in us doing that. So let's move back to the relationship.
And not only that, their argument wasn't only that Istria was liberated by the Yugoslav Communist Party or the Yugoslav partisans. It was also because of, and there you see it, that communists actually really cared about ethnicity, was also that Istria had a big Croatian and Slovenian or Slavic majority and an Italian minority. And if you look at that point in time after the Second World War, Trieste, the city of Trieste, which was a big harbor, the city itself was predominantly Italian, but all the surrounding villages were mostly ethnically Slovenian. So their argument wasn't only that they liberated that territory, but also that because of the Slovenian or let's call it just Slavic identities that lived in that areas, that they should join Yugoslavia. That's also one of the things that later on Austria and Yugoslavia had also conflicts in for a region in Austria called a federal state in Austria called Kärnten. That's on the southern border with today's Slovenia, where they eventually agreed on the referendum, where the Slovenes eventually said that Slovenes and Austrians living in that territory, that they would rather join Austria than Slovenia, and with that also Yugoslavia. It's an interesting take with Trieste and the whole tampon zone and everything, but it's too complicated. It's a too complicated mess. But yeah, Stalin didn't want to drag the USSR into a conflict with the West because Italy was on the side of the Western powers after the Second World War.
Relationship between Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union. We know that the relationship was strained and would eventually snap entirely, but how did that happen? And most importantly, why did that happen? To understand that, we need to examine the relationship that existed between the two socialist brothers. So, as we just mentioned, two situations that strained Yugoslav relations with the West, Istria and Greece. Well, let's keep in mind, both of these situations also strained relations between Belgrade and Moscow. Stalin did not like the independence shown by Tito in challenging the West over Istria, as well as the potential for an expanded conflict, which the Soviets could be dragged into. Moscow also didn't support Yugoslav unilateral support for the Greek communists, again fearing being drawn into a wider conflict. But the biggest strain placed on the relationship was not actually over either of these matters, but rather over Bulgaria.
The Confederation.
The already Sovietized state of Bulgaria had begun talking about an integration project along with the idyllic Adriatic nation of Albania. The ultimate goal of the talks was to establish a unified socialist state. Critically, however, these talks were going on without the official blessing of the Soviet Union. The 1947 Bled Agreement, signed by Tito and Bulgarian leader Georgy Dimitrov, opened the path to the Unified Balkan Federation. Included in this were some territorial transfers, including the return of the western outlands to Bulgaria and the unification of Vardar Macedonia with Prin Macedonia. The agreement also created a visa-free region as well as a customs union, and Bulgaria agreed to recognize the Macedonian minority on its
need to remember that the name of the state is Yugoslavia, so Southern Slavs, and Bulgaria is also a Slavic nation, so a South Slavic nation. So it was also, if you look at the ethnicity part, also a logical thing for the Yugoslav government to push.
Albania, although nominally an independent country, was in reality a Yugoslav satellite, and it was expected that it too would join in this new Balkan Union. But clearly, this union didn't happen. So what did happen? Well, the Soviet Union happened. Although Stalin wasn't opposed to the union in principle, he was dismayed that the process was going on without his involvement or blessing. As a result, Bulgarian and Yugoslav officials were summoned to Moscow and criticized for launching the project without prior clearance and guidance from the Soviet Union. While the Bulgarians accepted the chastisement and backed off from the Union, the Yugoslavians were upset by the Soviet involvement. To be honest though, I can understand a Soviet objection to the sudden appearance of a large socialist state with an independent streak a mile wide on its borders. So, a few minutes ago I mentioned that...
As you can see, Stalin, actually, a lot of the times, a lot of historians and a lot of the professors that talked about the post Second World War Yugoslavia or Cold War Yugoslavia until the breakup, they always mentioned that it was kind of a character competition or whatever between Stalin and Tito. As you can see, like, Stalin agreed or wasn't opposed to the union, but he was like, hey, why are you doing that independently? And I'm interested if he's going to mention agriculture and the peasantry in Yugoslavia, because that was also a really, really, really big factor. And one of the topics that I really dived into while studying was also the colonization and agricultural reforms that Yugoslavia did after the Second World War. So I'm interested if he's going to mention also the agriculture aspect.
Tito was able to pursue a more independent policy because Yugoslavia didn't have Red Army troops on its soil backing up Moscow's will. Additionally, Yugoslavia didn't share a common border with the Soviet Union. This greatly decreased the possibility of direct military action by Moscow against Yugoslavia. Either Hungary or Czechoslovakia shared the same advantage, to the detriment of their
the Hungarian Revolution and the Prague Spring,
respectively. Now, we know that up until the almost realized United Balkan Federation, Belgrade and Moscow had shared fairly good relations. The Soviet Union had been providing aid to Yugoslavia since the end of the fighting, including food assistance and helping to remove mines that had been laid in the Danube.
Especially the food assistance was pretty damn important, because, as I said, approximately 40%. I forgot how much of percentage-wise plants and plantations were destroyed, but livestock was like 40% gone, and also the bigger infighting, because of the guerrilla war tactics of the partisans, were not done in urban areas. It isn't a normal tactic to take on big cities and then go from one big city to another, or to establish clear front lines between enemies, but it was small skirmishes, and they, of course, mostly happen in rural areas or in areas that border more forests where you can hide after attack, and so on. So, of course, not only the cities were which are mostly industrial, but the agricultural hubs, so the rural hubs of the country, were really destroyed. And after the Second World War, especially the aid in food was important for Yugoslavia.
In return, Tito was a vocal supporter of Stalin, and they jointly criticized what was referred to as national communism, or communist organizations who advocated for the building of socialism based on the local situation.
What?
As the first head national communism.
Sorry.
The end of the fighting, including food assistance and helping to remove mines that had been laid in the Danube.
And also one thing about agriculture and the food production in Yugoslavia, the biggest agricultural regions in Yugoslavia were in today's part of Croatia called Slavonia. That's the and also in today's Vojvodina in Serbia. That's also a semi-autonomous region in Serbia, whatever. But they lie on the Pannonian Basin, which is really a fertile land. And a lot of the population on that territory in Slavonia and Vojvodina were actually the so-called Donauschwaben, Volksdeutsche, German Swabians, who lived there for generations, hundreds of years. But they, of course, with the coming of the new government, were expelled out of the state and transported, and approximately 500,000 people were just either deported from the state, and all of their possessions were taken. And the Germans who lived there for generations, they were the most efficient ones with producing or harvesting the food that came out of their labor, because they had the best technology, the best techniques, the biggest lands, and so on. But after they were gone, Yugoslavia sent in, that's the colonization policy after the Second World War, Yugoslavia sent in people, Slavs, especially Serbs and Croats, from poorer regions like Herzegovina in Bosnia, Kosovo, also the inner parts of Dalmatia, which was really, really poor and also devastated by war, and different parts of Bosnia. They sent them into the fertile land to house them in those homes, which were left vacant from the Germans, but they didn't know how to use the techniques. They didn't know how to live in those big houses. And the food production of Yugoslavia, until the newcomers kind of adopted the way the Germans did it before, or just to simplify it was a mess. With food and agriculture, it was a mess directly after the Second World War.
In return, Tito was a vocal supporter of Stalin, and they jointly criticized
and Tito was also
what was referred to as national communism.
And Tito was also called the Stalin of the Balkans, or the best student of Stalin.
Additionally, Belgrade was selected as the first headquarters for the Common Forum,
True.
the centralized organization of all Marxist-Leninist
But they're going to be kicked out
after
the
around the world.
Oh.
But following the formal rebuke from Moscow, relations began to get a little frosty. In early 1948, Stalin declined giving permission for Yugoslav bases to be built in Albania, as he didn't like the increasing independent influence Tito held over the Hoxhatic state. Despite this lack of permission, however, Tito went ahead with his plans, taking advantage of the fact that the Soviet Union shared as many borders with Albania as it did with Yugoslavia.
So none.
Zero.
Yeah.
Moscow quickly responded by refusing to expand the number of technical specialists assigned to Yugoslavia. Tito's response to this was to decline to provide any further economic updates to the Soviet Union. It may seem like a minor thing, but in the world of socialism, economics is everything. Stalin's response to this was to recall all Soviet specialists stationed in Yugoslavia. This initiated an exchange of letters between Stalin and Tito. In a letter dated the 27th of March, penned by both Stalin and Molotov, they criticized Yugoslavia for
now comes the Televisa presenta,
their unfriendly
the soap
attitude
opera,
towards the Soviet
the drama.
specialists. They criticized the Yugoslavian Communist Party, doubted the Marxist credentials of some of the Yugoslav leaders, and expressed their disappointment towards the behind-the-scenes criticism that the Yugoslav Communist Party had directed at the Soviet Communist Party for its own lack of revolutionary fervor. A Yugoslav response came on April 13th, firmly stating that the Yugoslavian Communist Party strongly maintained its position as a revolutionary party. They reaffirmed their friendly position towards the USSR, but also complained about Soviet moves to recruit Yugoslavians for use in the secret services.
True.
So, at this point, the exchange is polite but firm. A minor...
Why in the secret services? Because Tito knew if he lets too many Yugoslavs go to, to sympathize or to get educated or brainwashed or whatever in the Soviet Union. And I'm not telling that nobody was brainwashed in Yugoslavia, but I mean, under Stalin, he knew that if they come back, they're probably going to be Stalin loyalists. So the independence Tito's independence would diminish, or maybe they could betray him in a coup or something like that. So of course he wasn't stupid. He knew that, because prior to that, he got all of his Marxist or tactical education in the Soviet Union. So he knew exactly how they operate.
Quarrel, nothing to really worry about. And then, like some sort of late-night drunken text message to an ex, Stalin and Molotov responded. This text, it was actually a letter from May 4th, criticized the tone of the Yugoslavian letter as too ambitious, and accused them of an unwillingness to accept and correct their mistakes. It criticized their negative attitude towards the Soviet specialists, and for failing to clean up the Yugoslavian foreign ministry of what was referred to as English spies. It also went on to call out Belgrade on its benevolent attitude towards the American ambassador in Yugoslavia, as well as his informers, as well as Tito's rejection of ideas put forward to him by the Soviet ambassador, referring to the Soviet Union as the country which saved Yugoslavia from occupation. Finally, the letter accused Yugoslavia of treating its friend and ally, the Soviet Union, the same way that it treated capitalist states such as the United Kingdom and even the United States. Tito's response to all of this was to stand firm, rejecting the accusations, but also calling for a resolution to these misunderstandings to be reached at the June 1948 session of the Common Forum.
But they were kicked out of the...
A proposal was put on the table later in May to hold a special session of the Common Forum whose sole purpose would be to discuss the Yugoslavian Communist Party.
And during the war on the Yugoslav territory, during the Second World War, they were also not only Red Army intelligence people stationed in Yugoslavia who briefed Tito on, Red Army movements and eventual supplies and so on, but there were also British intelligence officers surrounding Tito. During the war, so he was actually a firm ally to the Allies, and the Soviets didn't care that much back then. And I'm still interested if he's going to mention the peasantry and the rural areas and in the agriculture.
However, Tito rejected the idea. Discussed to hold a special session of the Common Forum whose sole purpose would be to discuss the Yugoslavian Communist Party. However, Tito rejected the idea. He also then refused to take part in the already scheduled June Common Forum session, claiming to be ill. Likely, he was simply seeking to avoid facing criticism from not only the Soviet Union, but the other communist parties aligned to Moscow. On June 28th, after being further criticized for its independent-minded policies, its deviations from Marxism, and its unwillingness to constructively face criticism, Yugoslavia was expelled from the Common Forum. This was the official separation of Yugoslavia from the rest of the socialist bloc.
True.
A period known as the Inform Bureau. Now, in the lead up to the split, some Yugoslavian party officials had opposed Tito's pursuit of a more independent path, siding with Moscow and Stalin.
The typical
After
Stalinists.
the split, these Cominformists, as they became known, were purged from the party. Waves of arrests conducted by the UDBA followed, and the political prison on the barren island
UDBA, the UD, it's so funny to pronounce it in English, but the UDBA, the UDBA, was practically the secret service of Yugoslavia. And Goli Otok wasn't technically on paper, as Tito and the Yugoslav government, communist government described it. It wasn't a prison, a political prison. Of course it wasn't. It was a re-education camp where most of the violence actually didn't come from the guards. They were sent, you can see it, Goli Otok. I'm gonna put a map on here to show you where exactly it is. It's basically in the Adriatic Sea in today's Croatia, and I'm going to show you where it is. But basically, the they were sent there to re-educate themselves, to de-Stalinize themselves, and to become Titoists. And most of the violence came actually from other inmates, not the guards, because the inmates wanted to prove themselves that they are now loyal to the new government. And let's say when new inmates came in, they were, like beat them up and whatever, mistreat them. Like, how could you, whatever, think against Tito and support Stalin over Tito and blah, 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 blah. So it was pretty intense. They're brutal stories. And percentage-wise, as far as I remember, percentage-wise, if you look at the population and in different, later on, federate states and today's independent states, with the inmates percentage-wise, most of them were actually Montenegrins.
Conducted by the UDA.
Just a fun fact.
Followed in the political prison on the barren island of Goli Otok.
Goli Otok, yeah.
Tito may not have
wanted
to follow Stalin's leadership, but was clearly happy to borrow from some of his methods. Moscow, for its part, responded to the split by beginning.
And let's look at it from a logical perspective. Okay, so let's say you're Tito. You know the tactics that the Soviets are going to use to dethrone you, to stage a coup d'etat or whatever. Okay, so you know that they're going to target loyalists to Stalin and the Soviet Union inside of your country to stage a coup. What do? If you don't I mean, it's a brutal thing to do. It's a brutal way, but I'm just putting my mind in their shoes, putting myself in their shoes. So of course you need to eliminate those forces which could stage a coup and then leave Yugoslavia not independent anymore and just make it another satellite state to the Soviet Union. And a lot of this is now a fun fact. A lot of the people misused that thing, because every time when you interrogate some prisoners, like, okay, he had a Stalin picture somewhere in his house, somebody found it, he ended up in Goli Otok, but of course he was questioned first, and then he needed to give names, and of course he's going to give some names, some random names, and then those random names are going to give some other random names that they are also Stalinists. So a lot of people who weren't actually Stalinists ended up, so let's call them innocent people, or not with this, but innocent people ended on Goli Otok, so normal civilians. And there were also parts of misuse where normal, regular people, like jealous husbands or jealous whatever girlfriends, who would accuse, let's say a jealous husband accuses a lover of his wife that he saw, that he has some picture, blah, blah, blah. And the guy is gone. It was crazy. It was crazy.
A troop buildup on the Hungarian-Yugoslav border, as well as encouraging the Hungarian army to strengthen itself. However, the demonstration of Western commitment to stopping communism.
And one thing also about the persecutions and imprisonment and executions and everything, a big important figure for Yugoslavia and the way that they dealt with political dissidents and brutality and whatever was, after the Second World War, the Minister of Interior, which isn't that often mentioned in not even Croatian historiography, but certainly not on a wider international stage like big YouTube channels. But Aleksandar Ranković, look him up. He was the Minister of Interior, and while he was in office, it was, everything that Tito said, he would double and triple it. If Tito came to him and said, I don't know, arrest 200 guys, he would arrest 10,000 people. And after Aleksandar Ranković stepped away, or was given another position. I'm not going to go into his career, but you can check it out, Alexander Rankovic. The drastical moves of the government reduced. So a lot of fewer people were imprisoned. Of course, those falsely political imprisonments happened still, but at a less lower rate. And let's say people didn't die necessarily if they did something wrong against the government. Like they wouldn't disappear, but they were would of course start to lose their jobs, start to be socially what is it called, like chastised, like like we don't want to talk with you anymore, and so on. So it was still brutal, but way less brutal than under the Minister of Interior Alexander Rankovic.
In itself. However, the demonstration of Western commitment to stopping communism in Korea caused the potential invasion of Yugoslavia.
Korea kind of saved an invasion of Yugoslavia.
How did the West react to the split in the bloc? Well, they took advantage of it, of course, and began cultivating a deeper relationship with Yugoslavia. Economic aid was provided, and by the early 1950s, the United States had even begun supplying military aid, because naturally. The West was courting Yugoslavia, hoping to draw them into the Western military alliance, NATO. Tito, however...
And it was also cool to have a communist country on your side against communist / Tito / socialist, whatever you want to call it, country on your side that's firmly against the USSR. And this animosity between Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union wouldn't end until 1953, until Stalin dies. And after that, all the Soviet leaders after Stalin were trying to improve the relationship with Yugoslavia, to stay on neutral ground, to even get them back on their side. But Yugoslavia, together with India and Egypt and other countries, started to form the non-aligned movement in the 60s, which is still disputed how independent or not aligned they are. But like they weren't officially weren't on a side of either big bloc, so the NATO or the Warsaw Pact.
Was wary of trading one master for another and made the decision not to join the alliance, instead deciding to align Yugoslavia to a third way, what would eventually become the
non-aligned movement,
officially formed in 1961. But we're going to cover that.
I think they were also the first meeting that it was also in Belgrade, the capital of Yugoslavia.
More in a future episode. Incidentally, it was at this point that a domestic Yugoslavian arms industry was created. Domestically, the split caused some shifts as well, as I'm sure you'd expect. The country continued to be a one-party state under the control of the Popular Front, a coalition dominated by the communists, but steps began to be taken to move away from the Stalinist policies that had dominated the immediate post-war period. This, of course, does not mean that Tito intended to move towards democracy, simply to make changes to allow for greater efficiency. Most notably in this was the process of decentralization he undertook to allow for better local decision-making.
And the Federate
States. In 1952, the Yugoslavian Communist Party was renamed the League of Communists of Yugoslavia, a federation of the communist parties from each of the regions that made up the country. So that would be a League of Communists of Croatia, of Serbia, of Bosnia and Herzegovina, of Macedonia, of Montenegro, of Slovenia, of Kosovo, and of Vojvodina. Now, 1952 also saw the implementation of the Basic Law, which underlined the importance of personal rights and freedom of association for working people. This was a necessary element for another reform that was introduced as part of the economic reforms in Yugoslavia, a unique mechanism in the socialist
he started to talk about economics.
Self-management. Workers' councils were put in charge of the direction of enterprises, and they received a share of the profits of production. Based on the concept of creating and maintaining the interest of workers in increasing production to their own benefit, this obviously differed greatly from the Marxist orthodoxy of the Soviet economy and has earned the name market socialism. The combination of market socialism, decentralized government, and Yugoslavia's key role in the non-aligned movement has come together to be known as Titoism, policies that continued in the country until it tragically broke apart in the Balkan Wars of the early 1990s. Titoist ideas influenced Alexander Dubček's attempts at reform in Czechoslovakia during the ill-fated Prague Spring, and even influenced policies in places such as Muammar Gaddafi's Libya. We will cover more on Titoism.
He has such a pleasant voice,
including its successes and failures, in later episodes to help further explain and clarify Yugoslavia's unique position in the Cold War. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode.
I did.
To make sure you don't miss all of our future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have made the bell button a fraternal bell button for life. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com, and we're active on Facebook and Instagram at The Cold War TV. If you enjoy our work, your financial support through www.patreon.com/thecoldwar or through YouTube membership would be greatly appreciated and helps to keep the channel going. If you aren't able to provide financial support at this time, please share this video and all of our videos widely and freely. This is the Cold War channel, and don't forget, the trouble with the Cold War is that it doesn't take too long before it becomes heated.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna explain the now because he did. I thought that he's going to mention it, but one thing that made Stalin furious was the way that Tito dealt with the peasantry and not nationalizing the all the agricultural land. So basically, what Tito did after the Second World War, as I said, he relocated, recolonized all the destroyed agricultural lands that he could get food from, because a lot of people were malnourished. There were also a lot of cases where people would die of hunger because of the result of the fighting. The thing that he noticed is that by agriculture, you need to have more production from more how to describe it, from more local people. So what he actually did, he nationalized practically he nationalized all the land. He took the land for the government from everybody, all cultural lands or lands that could be used as cultural but weren't. And then he privatized that land, but into smaller, like he would give it to more families, to more individuals, so that they could live off their own land and eventually maybe do some surplus. So let's say you were a wealthy farmer that wasn't that much devastated by the land, and you weren't the Donauschwaben, the Germans living in that agricultural area, and you had vast land. The government would first seize all your land, so you're not the owner, and then they would say, okay, that land is too big, and they would cut it in three and then give 2 parts to your neighbors who maybe don't have anything, so they can produce, and give you the middle one, and then you can produce on yourself. So actually, the farmland was privatized. That's a fun fact. In a communist state, the agricultural land was privatized eventually. Of course, landowners couldn't exceed a certain amount of acres, because if you're too big, you're a capitalist, and that stuff. And what I also wanted to say, a lot of historians also agree that that conflict between Tito and Stalin was also, as I said, a personality contest. And if you look at what Tito was mostly concerned with, especially in his later days, because he died in 1980, he was mostly concerned with what is it called? Not inner policy, but international policy. So he saw the non-alignment movement attached to the names Tito, Yugoslavia. He saw the worker self-management model of socialism, or market socialism, as he described. He saw that detached to his name. He saw Yugoslavia as a state also detached to his name. So if we look, let's say, for the last few years that he reigned, he was mostly somewhere abroad in Great Britain, in the US, in, I don't know, India, blah, 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 other non-aligned countries. He was more occupied with, like stabilizing and maintaining his image as a big, important international player. And if we look at his funeral also, I think that there were 180 delegations of different countries. I don't know if it's still, but it's one of the, I don't know if it's still, but it's one of the biggest funerals for a world or a leader of a country in history. So I think 180 delegations from the non-aligned movement, from NATO countries, from communist countries, all came to his funeral to Belgrade. Check that video out. I certainly forgot something. I certainly messed something up. Let me know. If you want to continue that talk or whatever, if you're interested in history, just subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate it. Watch other videos if you're also interested on my take on other topics, or from the community in the comment section. But I need to warn you, sometimes it's kind of a small guerrilla partisan war in the comment section. And if you want to join Discord, join our cool community, the link to the Discord is going to be also in the description below. So yeah, hope that you enjoyed it. Once again, see ya.